Prince Harry and his wife Meghan will no longer be working members of Britain's royal family.
Britain's Prince Andrew has strenuously denied participating in the alleged sex crimes levelled against US financier Jeffrey Epstein.
Good morning, I'm Joanna Coles, and I couldn't be more excited to have a conversation this morning with Tina Brown about her new book, The Palace Papers. It is already the talk of London, it's at the top of the bestseller list, and I'm sure it's the talk of Buckingham Palace. Tina, when the words go out across newsrooms in London that London Bridge is down, it signals the end of an extraordinary era for Queen Elizabeth II and the ascension of her son, who, let's face it, has the most extraordinary job of waiting for his mum to die so he can ascend to the throne. Does the royal family still matter when Charles becomes king, and why does it matter?
Thank you, Joanna, and hi to everybody watching Washington Post Live. The monarchy does still matter enormously, at any rate in Britain. It is the preeminent focus of national identity, national pride, history, tradition. And really, I'm not even sure that the Brits know how to be British anymore when the Queen dies, because she has been, for ever since anyone can remember, 70 years we're talking, the representation of these kind of stoic British ideals, even if the reality of Britain has changed enormously. She represents duty, service, absolute sort of commitment to the British ideal of keep calm and carry on. She's the personification of it. So when she goes, already there's a kind of low-grade fever running through the country of what is going to happen when the Queen dies. And I think there's going to be the most massive and sort of seismic national reaction to her death.
So what kind of a king do you think Prince Charles will be?
Well, I'm more optimistic than many, actually, about Charles. The monarchy's gone through these kind of massive moments before. When Queen Victoria died, everybody said, oh, it's over, it's over. But then, Edward VII, her son, reigned for 9 years, and he turned out to be a perfectly okay monarch and actually had some achievements and sort of changed the tempo and modernized a bit. Charles, I think, will be a very good transitional monarch. And I'm not of the sort of the party that says William should take over, not Charles, because I think you need that sort of bridge between the two eras. Charles is a very accomplished statesman at this point. His particular passions for the environment, organic farming, his cares about climate change happen to gel very well, finally, with the rest of the world and the British people. And he's married Camilla, who, was a pariah for so long. But now the Queen, at the beginning of the Jubilee sort of run-up, has announced that Camilla will be Queen, known as Queen Consort, with her blessing, which was great. It took that controversy off the table. So I think he's going to have a decent run, as long as he doesn't live to 102.
So let's talk about Camilla, because one of the things that's so fascinating about your book is you really go into depth about the women, other than Queen Elizabeth, of course, who are the power behind the throne. And you talk a lot about, frankly, the awful time that Camilla had once her relationship with Prince Charles had been exposed. Talk a little bit about how she came back and what was it about her resilience that has managed to now warm her way into the British people's hearts again?
Well, I mean, it's actually almost inconceivable how much abuse Camilla took. I mean, she was called hag, old bag, witch. I mean, these were the kind of words that were used about Camilla for years. And when, of course, the dreaded Camilla-gate tapes leaked, the phone call between Charles and Camilla, where he referred, unfortunately, to her as a certain kind of sanitary item.
I think you're talking about tampon gate for those who aren't familiar with the story.
Exactly. You know, she was a laughing stock. They were ridiculed, and she really was. You know, she had to sort of go underground. I mean, she said, I had to sort of hide for a whole year in my house and just sort of read books and tried to do oil paintings. I mean, she really had to hide, and that dreadful uproar, you can imagine. I mean, we know how much it affected her children, how embarrassing it was, how terrible, but she kind of, all the way through it, she's never said a word. She has never complained. I mean, her maxim is always, thou shalt not whine. She's never leaked. She simply toughed it out. And she did it without a kind of, sort of mea culpa or anything. She just simply laughed it off and just toughed it out. The British like that very much because that's stoic. That's kind of, she never complained. So she toughed it out. And then there was a great campaign by Charles to sort of introduce her gradually to the public after the divorce from Diana. And then what happens? Diana dies, which of course, oh my God, she's driven underground again, because at that point, she's also public enemy number one, as the sainted Diana being feted by the world. Camilla was the sort of ugly, considered the ugly sort of force that had driven, Diana into such pain and sadness. I mean, the love that Charles had for her. So she then has to hide again. But again, stoically just waits it out and goes forth. And gradually over the years, with a lot of PR care and strategy from Mark Bolland, who was their, very skillful, actually, private secretary at the time. I mean, Mark Bolland never got any kind of a royal order as a thank you, which I think should be remedied, because without Mark Bolland, I don't think that it would ever have been rectified in the way that it was. But inch by inch, she was sort of brought out into the public light until finally, with the Queen having been so against it, and she was, because though she actually liked Camilla, who shared many of her interests, she really thought that Charles should move on, find somebody appropriate, stop with this Camilla mess. And Charles made it clear he wasn't going to. So finally, she lets him marry her. And from that moment, really, that Camilla became the Duchess of Cambridge, she has not actually Duchess of Cornwall, I'm sorry. She really hasn't put a foot wrong. She's been supportive. She's been charming. She's been hardworking. She's taken on a lot of good, appropriate causes, like, domestic violence, for which she's very authentically involved, has a book club, always there with Charles now on the royal tours. And she's made him now, the best thing she's done is to make him an unapologetically happy man. And I mean, he's transformed since he's married Camilla, in fact. And that is her biggest service, essentially, to the monarchy so far.
So, and she's got almost no profile in America. Do you think that they will be working on that once he ascends the throne?
Well, she'd like a profile in America. She would like to have one. But how do you get a profile today unless you're going to do a major sit down with a huge anchor, right? And there's no way that Camilla Parker Bowles will ever do that. I mean, think about her predecessors in that horrific decision. We've got Charles's disastrous interview with Dimbleby. We have Camilla's disastrous interview with Bashir. We have Andrew's, when he strapped on a suicide vest and talked to Emily Maitlis. And then we have, Oprah's interview with, there's just no way in the world that Camilla is going to sit down for an Ask Me Anything interview in America. She'd rather be disliked.
Well, and there's a wonderful anecdote in your book when she's being monstered at her father's home, I think, by the British press, and I want to come on to their relationship with the royal family too, because you make the very strong point in the book that the British royals don't really exist without the British press, and yet the two of them are in sort of, a battle to the death almost. But there's a wonderful anecdote where Camilla's father comes out and says to the press, and they're all eager because they think he's going to give them a great quote. And the quote is, "We keep our mouths shut. We keep our traps shut," I think he says.
Right.
So assuming that Charles, and to your point, is actually the right man for the time, and that all the things that he believes in, like preserving the planet and the environment and eating organic, are now of the time. And he looks as if he's in fairly robust health. Assuming
he does get pinker and pinker, doesn't he? He looks like a Rowlandson cartoon, like a sort of gouty squire. It's amazing. And by the time he ascends, he's going to be bright red, I think.
It's true. We've got some interesting photo rolls during this interview, and I looked at one of the pictures, and Camilla looks fantastic, and Charles just looks beet red next to her. So he's either spending a lot of time outside, or who knows what he's doing. Maybe he's using some sort of organic skincare. But let's just think about, you know, the one thing that Charles and Camilla aren't, as you think of them taking over the throne, and you look back 60 years to when Queen Elizabeth ascended the throne in her early 20s, super young, she brought a sort of sex appeal with it. Charles and Camilla bring a different kind of appeal. But William and Kate still feel like they bring tremendous sex appeal to the role, unless, you know, William doesn't ascend the throne until he's 60. Let's talk a little bit about Kate and William, because it does feel like the actual future of the monarchy is probably in their hands.
Well, I think that frankly, the House of Windsor is extremely lucky to have William as the older son, really, and even more lucky that he decided to marry a daughter from, you know, of a middle-class family who turns out to be absolutely flawless in her learning of, training for, and adoption of the role of the future queen. He is composed, you know, he's judicious, careful, not as sexy, of course, as the much more turbulent and charismatic Harry. But thank God Harry isn't the first son, because, you know, it's a job that involves doing a lot of very dull things a lot of the time. And William has never shirked that, actually. There's never been a period, even Charles had a very tough time accepting that his future destiny was to always know what he'd be doing exactly on the same day a year from now. He really hated it. And he also, I guess, knew he had to wait a long time, which William doesn't. But William really has always embraced it. He was trained for it. Diana always encouraged him to know that this was his destiny. She never actually encouraged him to think of anything else. And so who he married then became the most important thing. And one of the things that I learned really in this book, essentially, is that who they marry is the most important decision they ever make. You know, the Queen Mother, so important for the success of George VI, you know, who was a sort of stammering, shy, you know, awkward fellow who the Queen Mother sort of helped to push out and to nurture and to kind of help and support. Similarly, Philip, you know, huge help to the Queen, much, you know, iconoclastic, jollied her along, made her feel less timid, was always there as a truth teller in her life, right to the bitter end, her strength and stay, you know, she called him. And then, you know, we've got Camilla, who Charles wasn't allowed to marry and flailed around until he did, and now he's very happy. And it's the same thing with William. You know, amazingly, he found this girl, as she then was, of course, Kate, at St Andrews University in Scotland. And he did make her wait 10 years. And the amazing thing is that she did wait 10 years. I mean, what modern girl, you know, as beautiful, educated, in demand as Kate, would actually spend 10 years molding her life around marrying, you know, the future king? Very few women would have had, frankly, the patience for that. Or the strategy for that, and she did.
I wanted to ask you about that, because there was a sense in the book that there was something premeditated about this, and I think perhaps for me the most astonishing detail was that she'd actually got a place at Edinburgh University. She was going to go, and then at the last minute, I think after the news that Prince William was going to St Andrews came out, she then changed from Edinburgh to St Andrews, which in American terms is a little bit like you know, being accepted at Harvard and then suddenly at the last minute saying you're going to go to Tufts. They're in the same area, but they're very different institutions. Was it as calculated as that?
Well, that is the fascinating biography point that I spent a lot of time researching, actually, is like, were there any conceivable other reasons why Kate would have switched? I mean, Kate was not an unconventional young girl at all. I mean, she was very conservative even then. She'd studied hard for St Andrews. She got all the qualifications for it. Her sister was going to St Andrews, I beg your pardon, Edinburgh. You know, she was going to study history of art, for which Edinburgh is a preeminent, you know, university. What on earth could have made her make that decision? And I did come to the conclusion that it was this news that had broken. She then delayed her going for, you know, longer so that she could be there at the same time. So I do think that there was a certain amount of strategy. I say that Love and Strategy would be a great name for a Cambridge, branded perfume. But I think it was a real love match. I think that they did fall in love, but it's a different issue from falling in love genuinely, as they did, for staying that obstacle course. I mean, she was on a snakes and ladders board for 10 years and could have stepped on a serpent at any time and gone straight to the bottom. It required absolute discretion. And like Camilla, Kate has never said or leaked an indiscreet word. It required a family that really erected a Praetorian guard around her. And another sort of classic thing I found really writing this is like who your family is the other most important thing about being a success. Camilla had the Shand family, who, as you pointed out, the major comes out and says, our family says, keep your trap shut. That was the philosophy of the Shands. Incredibly supportive, loyal, warm, wrapped Camilla in the family blanket. Same thing with the Middletons. They forged this guard around her, particularly Carol Middleton, wonderful strategist, the Kris Jenner of Bucklebury, were absolutely focused on her children and making them successsul. And, it worked. I mean, she was a kind of wonderful home counties tiger mum, and she's absolutely kept, her children have all done extraordinarily well. So you have that with Kate. So they were hugely important. And of course, the Middletons became very important to William. I mean, in some ways, you can imagine, he hadn't got a mother and his father has this incredibly sort of grand and sort of old fashioned lifestyle. Whenever he has a dinner party, you have sort of Catherine the Great china and, 15 plates and knives and forks. Whereas the Middletons were just, the equivalent of a pipe and slippers. They liked watching TV, they played tennis in the garden. So in a sense, the Middletons became his adopted family too. That was a major seduction point for Kate. And as the years went by, obviously for William, it felt, I am so comfortable here with this family. They are my family. And, then he proposed. And it was a massive thing, really, that this happened, that this young woman from this, Berkshire middle-class family is our next queen, but one
right.
Anyway.
And she moves from being, as the tabloids called her, weighty Katie, to getting what she wanted. I mean, it's hard not to come out of reading the book with enormous amount of respect for Kate, because she's been sort of taunted by the tabloids and goaded by them. And you feel like, actually, if the future of the monarchy is in her hands, it's going to be fine, because she seems intelligent, she's well educated, she's organized, she's got enormous respect for the duty of the job, as you pointed out. And William does too, clearly. And obviously, he's been a rescue helicopter pilot for many years. So he's actually done something too. So let's talk about then the younger brother. And I want to talk about Meghan and Kate. I want to talk about Meghan and Harry. I want to talk about William and Harry. I'm not quite sure where to start. But let's talk a little bit about the boys' relationship. William and Harry's relationship, because it always seemed that it was very close. And obviously it's become less close as Harry has moved to the west coast of America. They see each other much less, and their roads seem to have diverged.
Well, they were very close as children. They were the only, it was William who had to come into Harry's room with his father and break it to poor young Harry at the age 12 that their mother had died in that car crash in Paris. He always was the protective arm around Harry. Enormously close, best friends, the only people who aren't two people on the planet who knew what it was like, not just to go through Diana's death, but all the horrific scandals and, and endless, tabloid hysteria that followed it. So they were really close, united in this kind of bubble together. At the same time, what I really learned, which was interesting, was how important Harry was to William. It wasn't just that William protected Harry. Harry also was very important to William as a sort of the iconoclast for William. He was the one person who could josh with his brother and bring him down to earth as only a sibling can. Because William is going to be king, and so whatever they say about being normal and how everything's so wonderfully ordinary and there's really no difference, etc., there is a difference. William is going to be king, and there is no one in his circle who's not deeply aware of that. So Harry was the one person who was on his level and could just say, come off it, to William. And I'm told that now that he misses that, tremendously, because they really were close for a very, very long time. You might think, and I do really, is it was sort of inevitable that their paths would somewhat diverge, because when Harry came out of the army, where he was for 10 years, an enormously impressive military career, actually, and he was to the manner born. I mean, so being a soldier was really what his vocation. But he had to leave after 10 years, because essentially to move up in the army these days, you have to have much more sort of academic prowess than Harry ever had. You can't be sort of, in the front lines of the military forever. So there was no way that he could stay. And it was thought, well, there's plenty for Harry to do. He's going to be the spare wheel, essentially, does all the kind of foreign representing of the Queen. The sovereign needs to be reported. She's supported. She's getting older. It seemed as if Harry could have a big role, but Harry didn't like that role and felt marginalised. He felt that he'd always been raised with William as equals, essentially, by Diana. And the difference is Andrew and Charles had about a 10-year age gap between them. So Andrew never really saw himself as sort of Charles's peer in that sense. He was always the kid brother. He was, Charles was way ahead. But William and Harry were very close, only 2 years between them. So increasingly, Harry felt, a kind of beginnings of a resentment that somehow he was being marginalized, that he had these great communications gifts, which he does, and somehow wasn't being deployed properly in that role. And of course, when William married Kate, as inevitably happens, the brother feels a bit dislodged, right? He felt a bit like Bridget Jones, like, hanging around as the spare wheel. And it became tricky, even though he was very fond of Kate. And he was desperate to get married, desperate. And he felt bitter because, unlike William, who'd found his love, in the sort of bubble of St. Andrews University, unfortunately, Harry didn't. He was in the army. It was much harder for him. And so his first two girlfriends were driven away by the press, really. The two serious girlfriends, Chelsea Davy and Cressida Bonus, beautiful, fabulous young women, both of them, who Harry was mad about. I mean, he could have easily married either of them and was thought that he might. But they were always just, in the end, like driven away by the horror of being stalked and hacked and, eavesdropped and it's horrible being, involved with a member of the royal family. And he was bitter about that. So that sort of increased his resentment. He felt he was getting all the bad things about being royal without the upside that William got. And there was quite a lot of rivalry between them about the kind of portfolio that William was getting and the one that Harry thought he was. I mean, that was an interesting thing that I discovered, the fact that there were Olympic rows about sort of what Harry considered, his desire to represent issues like Africa and, the environment. But those were William's interests too. So there was a lot of competition when that happened. And I think that William was really quite envious of the success of Invictus Games, the initiative that Harry launched very, very successfully to create a kind of Special Olympics for vets, which has just happened. All of these things were kind of bubbling and, and kind of pushing them apart. And then, of course, Harry meets Meghan, and that, he feels he's found his soulmate. And, he's transfixed, essentially. And William wanted him to slow down. And that was very, very aggravating to Harry. He thought he was being patronized. He said, he resented William saying slow down. And I think that in fairness, William was just saying, consider how tough this is going to be for her. He made Kate wait 10 years before.
There's a wonderful anecdote in the book where Harry decides to take Meghan to Botswana on, I think, their third date. And William Riley points out, when Harry says she's the one, he points out that actually this is the fourth person you've taken to Botswana. So, but let's talk also a little bit about, there's been a lot of discussion, and you talk about it in the book, about whether or not Meghan actually knew who Harry was, because she claims she never Googled him. And yet that seems highly unlikely because they were set up on a blind date.
Who doesn't Google their boyfriend? I mean, I'm sorry. It was very, to me, mysterious when she said to Oprah, I didn't do any research, because in my research, talking to all the people a lot of the people she worked with, in her actress life, she was incredibly well prepared as an actress. She was one of these actresses who always looking for notes from the director and information and boning up and trying to, she was playing a young lawyer, and so she wanted to know everything about what that young lawyer would confront. And And yet the biggest role of her life, which was to marry the grandson of the Queen, she says she did no research for. And I think that's unfortunate if she didn't, because she might have known more about what she was getting into. I mean, in fairness, I'm sure that Harry minimized the financial predicament they were going to find themselves in. I mean, hardly, it's unlikely that a man is going to say to her, look, hey, you're not going to have half the things you think you're going to get as a sort of fairy story princess. I mean, he'd already had two other very close girlfriends sort of driven away. He really wanted to nail Meghan down. He wanted to be married at that moment, and he was in love with Meghan, and he would have been devastated if that too had fallen apart. But the fact is, what Meghan really discovered is, she was always, as an actress, number 6 on the call sheet. That means you're the number 6 person in terms of being important on the show. Essentially, in Prince Harry, she also married number 6 on the call sheet, because he was actually 6th in line by that time to the British throne, because there was Charles, there was William, and there were William's 3 children, and then Harry. So in terms of the hierarchy of the palace, in terms of the monarchy, Harry was a wonderful addition to the sort of royal lineup, but he really wasn't going to get the kind of status, the kind of pulling power in terms of assignments, the kind of dwelling, all the things that you get, of course, when you're the first in line. And so that was for her very galling. I mean, she was essentially marrying for the first time. I mean, this woman who was 36 and had been earning her living very successfully from the age of 21 was suddenly completely dependent on her husband for money. And he was at the same time completely dependent on the bank of dad, which was Charles. And at the same time also had to kind of ask Granny, the Queen, for, one of the houses on the royal estates to live. That's the kind of infantilizing that I'm sure, I know, was absolutely maddening to Meghan. I mean, she did not like it.
And yet it gave her a very specific role and a pulpit from which to have an authority talking about things, which perhaps she's now struggling to find. And it's sort of interesting watching her now, having given up with Harry, obviously, the royal moniker, to just sort of be in a pile of other celebrities, struggling for relevance, or at least that's what it feels like from the outside. And also, I mean, on the one hand, and I want to talk about the role of the British press here, because obviously Meghan and Harry felt particularly traumatized by them. But it's one thing to be traumatized by the British press. It's another to say you want privacy and that you're extremely anxious about security and you've got to pay for your own security. And then to sit down for a global interview with Oprah Winfrey. So what are the contradictions going on with Meghan and Harry? Why should we take them seriously?
Well, I mean, I think they both completely underestimated what it was going to be like to be without the palace platform. However much they hated, and they really did, I think, at that point, the constraints and the sort of pettiness, essentially, they conceived of the palace, and the advisors. Try doing it without the palace and the advisors, right? Because what the palace does, of course, it's an amazing has amazing convening power. There's no one who won't take a phone call if they say Buckingham Palace on the phone, Kensington Palace on the phone. So there's a huge convening power. Every major invitation in the world comes through that conduit. And the private secretaries could just sift and say, what about you appear at this? Well, why don't you do this appearance? And all of that's now gone. And essentially, they have to just hire PRs to do that for him. And their judgment is not necessarily the best judgment that they should be listening to, because, of course, they're trying to leverage whatever they say, the royal brand. And there's no PR that really knows how to do that better than Buckingham or Kensington Palace, right? So they're suddenly without this leverage. I think that Harry is in a much better spot because he brilliantly actually started this Invictus Games. And that's what his brand should be. He should just forget everything but the Invictus Games and just make that his brand. It's authentic. He really was, extremely impressive as a soldier. Vets are, in his bloodstream in terms of authentic caring about them. And it's a wonderfully connective cause, frankly, to be aligned to, and has really endless scope in multiple countries. Meghan doesn't really have a brand, is the truth. And she's you feel that she is sort of grasping somewhat at, whatever is the kind of Twitter caring of the moment. It's vaccinations, it's Ukraine, it's women's rights, it's, hey, my 40th birthday, let's have a mentoring scheme. Nothing is really going anywhere for Meghan. And then there is the question of the whole entertainment deals that they did. And I think that more savvy advisors, if they had thought about it, could tell them the whole problem with entertainment deals is that you have to deliver hits. They're great. Anyone can, if they're lucky, can sign a major entertainment deal. But where's the product? I mean, they've signed with Netflix. What have we seen? Nothing really, except this upcoming documentary with Invictus, which I think will be great, and I think it's a good idea actually. But creating entertainment that works is very hard to do. Their Spotify podcast kind of seems to have gone nowhere. Now she's, Meghan is now doing a new one about, archetypes or something, and you get a sense that there's a certain amount of flailing there, and Netflix is not doing so well. Are they going to renew that contract? So they're now having to scramble for the deals in the way that anybody is, who's a celebrity in the kind of platformless universe has to do. And I think it's a very hard task to keep that aloft. If you're royal, there's no timestamp on it. You can be as boring as you want for years and years, and still you're going to have big things coming your way.
Yeah, so you really feel in the book that Meghan is struggling for relevance. And you also feel that both of them were fantastically suspicious of the advisors in the palace. How treacherous was that palace hierarchy to negotiate for both Harry and Meghan? And I mean, at one point you talk about the Queen giving Meghan her most trusted advisor, Susan Hussey, but Susan Hussey was 80. So the idea that somehow there would be a real sort of relationship that felt modern is hard to imagine. So I guess what I'm asking is, was Meghan set up for success? Did she become too paranoid? Were the staff treacherous, or did they just choose to ignore actually pretty good advisors?
All at once, really. Actually, I think that the Queen and the palace set the Sussex up for a lot of success. I mean, the Queen gave her one of her most treasured patronages, which was patron of the National Theatre. What a fabulous thing for a former actress. I mean, a marvelous, prestigious patronage. She also made her vice chairman of the Commonwealth Foundation, which, given that Meghan had said that she had a huge desire to do sort of global humanitarian work, there's no better platform, essentially, to be able to talk about women's education, to talk about, the question of minorities. This was a fantastic platform, really, that needed modernizing and dusting off and repositioning, particularly in the kind of atmosphere right now, the social atmosphere of the moment with Black Lives Matters and all of these things that we've seen impacting on the Cambridge tour. But there was nonetheless a big role there, a long-standing role with a lot of longevity for the Sussexes. And the Queen's view, I'm told, is like, Prince Philip came into the royal family and he also actually scrambled. I mean, he felt completely that he had no role, no platform of his own. And over years, he carved one out for himself and made himself extraordinarily important, as an influencer, as a fundraiser, as a sort of icon of national virtue in a sense. I mean, in terms of his causes. May not personally have been, but certainly his causes. So there was bafflement actually in the palace that that they seemed not to appreciate what these things could become. Were the palace advisors treacherous? I think that the palace is a snake pit. I think it always has been. I mean, I think it's like any crusty institution, whether it's the BBC or the New York Times or Buckingham Palace. It's a crusty, dusty place which has got quite a lot of viperish people in it. But, frankly, the communications team at Buckingham Palace, Kensington Palace, and indeed for the Sussex's own team, who they hired, after all, were pretty impressive communications people and very smart. And actually, I think that they were able to hire anybody they wanted, essentially, to be their advisors. But they also had to listen to them. And I think that one of the problems was that they didn't really want to hear, they'd hear the advice and they didn't want the advice. I mean, they wanted to be able to have a commercial arm to their activities. That was the issue. That was the stumbling block. They saw, I mean, Meghan certainly saw the deals that were there to be made that they had to leave on the table because they were royals. They wanted to have the Commonwealth patronage, Harry's military patronages, HRH, all of the things that made them royal, but they also wanted to go off and make commercial deals to get the kind of financial, lucrative deals that they wanted, it seems, at this point, because they wanted to be able to use that leverage to have that. And, it was as if Meghan just could not sort of resist everything that was offered on the celebrity buffet. She wanted all of it at once.
So it was greed that drove her out?
I don't see it so much as greed. I don't see it so much as greed as a hunger to avail herself of the kind of wonderful global leverage that major celebrities have to be able to do their cause work, to be able to appear in the way they want, to be able to be free to say what they want, to be able to live in glorious houses without the strings attached. I don't think it was simple greed. No, I don't. I think it was really, she's looking at someone like Michelle Obama and thinking, wow, she has it all. She's got the stature and she has, the ability to live in amazing houses, go on amazing holidays, be the big voice for humanitarian, anything she wants, but also has freedom. And, that's what Meghan wanted as well. And I think that Harry came to want that. I don't think that he did conceive that because Harry wasn't really wired enough into the sort of, the celebrity entertainment complex like Meghan was. I think that it is true, though, that Meghan has been unfairly and I say this in the book, I actually think that it was unfair in a sense to call it Megxit, because I really think Harry wanted out himself. And, one of the advisors did say to me, and I was kind of shocked by this, very close in the circle, said to me, we always knew that Harry was going to go at some point. He was really unhappy. The Queen knew that at some point it was highly likely that Harry would want out, but they didn't know it would be so fast, and they didn't see it happening in the way that it did. And I think it's also then fair to say that Meghan gave Harry the tools to leave, because she was wired in, she understood the world of agents and deals. And this wasn't Harry's world, but suddenly he had in Meghan a very worldly strategist who he decided to trust above all the other advisors. And I don't think that was such a good, smart move. I think that, yes, I get that he wanted, this more exciting and imaginative use of his gifts. But I think there was a lot that could have been achieved inside the royal family. And that, by the way, is what his mother did. He's always saying, my mother would be, happy, etc. I don't know that Diana would. Diana always saw the power of changing within the structure of monarchy. She didn't want to be out of the monarchy. She wanted to hang on to her HRH, which was confiscated. She stayed living in Kensington Palace. Nothing would have prized her out of there. She saw that the royal imprimatur was always going to be the best, leverage, the best convening power, to promote the causes that she cared about. So I don't know that she would have ever really advocated, going off to live in Montecito without any of the patronages and any of the platform of the palace.
So do you think that, where is the relationship between William and Kate and Meghan and Harry now? Are they all talking? What happens when Charles ascends the throne? Do they all sit in a row, together, pretending they all get on fine? Where is that relationship now?
Well, the relationship now is pretty much non-existent. There's a lot of, it's got a lot of healing to do before there's any relationship now. I think it's even possible it could have been healed after the Oprah interview, although it was a very explosive and hurtful interview as far as they were concerned. But Harry's announcement that he's also going to do a tell-all memoir coming out this September was just a huge issue for the whole family. It's like they have it now hanging over them like the sword of Damocles, that come the fall, they're going to get another boatload, of flack from inside their own family, just at a point when the monarchy is very fragile, with the Queen, on a glide path to the end of her life. So there's a lot of anger about that inside.
And What do we think is going to be in the memoir? Because it's hard to think of what could be more explosive than accusations that the royal family are racist, which obviously they made during the Oprah interview.
Well, no names were named on that interview. Maybe he will name names. I'm told it's going to be very harsh.
Do you know who was he talking about at that moment?
We don't know. We don't know. And maybe he'll tell us. But I am told it's going to be a harsh book because he's anxious to tell his truth. And that truth is going to be
to earn the $20 million advance he's got for 3 books too, hasn't he? Isn't he? I would think.
I mean, I think it is. Personally, I think the royal family should write a huge check and say, look, Harry, here's a check for your security. Maybe you could just sort of postpone it indefinitely.
Well, maybe he could open a West Coast branch of the royal family for people to drop in and make it got Hollywood connections. So look, it would be remiss not to discuss Prince Andrew as we're just coming to the end of this interview. How much damage has he done to the royal family?
I think he's done a lot. He really has tarnished the crown, I think, enormously by his behaviour. And it's tragic, really, that in the Queen's Jubilee year she had to deal with this. I mean, here's this woman who is trying, to bring herself to the point of health and energy where she can have her last kind of major valedictory jubilee with the British nation. And then along comes Andrew with his endless, appalling behaviour, which has ended in this disgraceful kind of moral rout, where she's actually been forced to kind of cancel her own son, strip him of his military patronages. I mean, it's very, very painful for her personally. And I think it has been a tarnishing factor. What they're going to do with Andrew, I don't know, because he's a healthy 61-year-old man who happens to live a stone's throw from Windsor Castle, with great access to the Queen at all times, which is making the rest of the family extremely nervous. It's like having your worst member of the family really close to the major matriarch, and everyone is thinking, what on earth is he going to winkle out of her now? So he's, I mean, in past generations, years, decades, they would have banished him to some castle on the borders of Wales or something and pulled up the drawbridge, but they can't do that in the modern era. So that's a problem, and I think it's going to actually go on being a bit of a problem, frankly.
Well, and again, someone that didn't listen to his advisor when they said, please don't do this interview.
No, I mean, the incredible thing was that he absolutely didn't, that he sat down, that he elected voluntarily to sit down with probably, Britain's most accomplished prosecutorial journalist. It's like going on 60 Minutes and just saying, hey, ask me anything you like. For an hour, it went on and on and on. People were just gobsmacked. And it took place in Buckingham Palace, for goodness sake, of all places. And, apparently he basically bypassed the private secretaries and who would never have let him do it, and went straight to mummy and said, it's going to be all about my philanthropies. And the Queen was actually watching that interview with like supper on a tray, at Windsor. and she thinks she's going to be hearing about his philanthropies. And all of a sudden there is this unbearable 1 hour sort of humiliation. And everyone in the family was just completely stunned. I mean, Charles was in New Zealand at the time. Charles has the habit of always being on a foreign tour, thinking he's going to get press for talking about, global warming at a time when his family does something new, horrific. and then all that happens is he's walking around Bahrain or, Auckland saying no comment, no comment, no comment. So, it was a disaster. And I'm glad that they seem to have, they settled. They've tried to kind of clean it up in time for the Jubilee, but it's been horrific.
So I know when you were writing the book, you had your own personal sort of tragedy in that Harry Evans, your long-term husband, died, and Prince Philip also died, actually, almost within the same time frame, actually. Did it feel very different writing this book without him? Because obviously he was just a legendary editor, and I know he'd been very involved in your previous books.
Well, it did rather. I mean, I mean, Harry was my strength and stay, you know, as Philip was to Elizabeth. And I've never, I mean, I knew it was going to be a very difficult loss for me to bear after, you know, nearly 40 years together. And it has been a very difficult loss to bear. And of course, I missed him in every way. But, you know, he was my greatest editor, too. You know, there was nobody like Harry for giving your pages to at night, which I would do every evening. And he would disappear into his study and sort of next thing is an hour later, he'd put it into his extraordinary Cuisinart and he'd come back and he'd say, I just made a few changes. I'd look at it and think, why is it reading so well? I didn't even know what he'd done. So yes, I missed him all the way through hugely. But in some ways, I suppose having the book to sort of drive me on was better than, you know, crawling up in the fetal position in my bed during the lockdown and just sort of mourning. So it kept me going, I suppose, to have the book.
Well, the book is extraordinary. I couldn't put it down. I'm thrilled for you that it's doing as well as it is. It came roaring in at the top of the bestseller list. Huge congratulations and many thanks for your time this morning.
Thank you so much. And thanks, Washington Post Live, for this wonderful talk with Joanna.
Thank you very much for joining us.